welcome to the video. I decided to make a small introduction to this video about exhausts. I've been that guy. I'm sure you've been that guy. And when you get older, you realise you were that guy, making a racket, just revving the hell out of it, riding up and down the street, and annoying a lot of people in the process. Well, you thought it was the best thing going, and that you were the coolest chap around. I've decided to present all the information I've learnt over my years of using nitro cars to help you have options available to you so that you can carry on using them, because I want people to enjoy this sport and this hobby, and I want to present them with the tools and products and ideas that can keep people riding nitro, because I do think it's cool. Alright, welcome to the video again. Now we're going to look at a lot of different nitro exhausts available, and one of the reasons I think it's really important to look at nitro exhausts is because, as we all know, people love to moan about the sound and ruin our fun, mainly because they think we're ruining their fun playing with nitro cars, making a lot of noise. But there is stuff you can do about it, and I would suggest you do, because we want to play nitro more and keep playing nitro, and therefore it's best to just stop pissing people off and actually do what you can about it. But I would say there is some benefits in looking at different exhausts, because when you do quiet down that sound and you can reduce the tension in the air, which we do love, but it helps you focus on your driving, the engine tune, lines, and all sorts of other aspects about the car, which can sometimes quite literally get drowned out with that screaming exhaust. So firstly, let's look at what ends up being some of the loudest exhausts, which would be one like this, which is very lightweight racing type exhaust for a buggy. It's got the springs and a flange, so there's nearly no part of the silicone in contact with the exhaust gases, and so it's all just metal, thin aluminium all the way through and out. Now these exhausts make the most sound because there's almost nothing that damps that sound down. You can see there's some sort of Nova Rossi racing exhaust. I mean, this is what people want for racing. Probably makes the most power, saves the most weight, but makes the most noise as well. In contrast, let's look at a plastic exhaust. This is the standard exhaust from a HPI Savage. Fairly thick plastic. And you can sort of hear that is going to damp down some sound. And these are a lot quieter, these plastic exhausts. There's not really much weight penalty either for running one, but they do make a significant difference in sound. Another example of a plastic exhaust is one from Antsman cars. The Antsman Terrier, Virus, they're 1/8 scale buggies and cars. And again, that actually sounds even thicker in practice. And I do know for a fact these are really quiet exhausts, significantly quieter than an alloy one, with no real loss in power. The shape's the same, the chamber size is the same, so you just benefit from not making such a racket. We'll have a look inside these exhausts, because they can be opened as well after. Now, one of my favourite exhausts available is the Kyosho one. This is what comes with their RTR 1/8 scale cars, the Inferno ST, I think the Mad Force. Now these are aluminium, so they look good, they can be polished, but as you can hear, they're a thick aluminium, and you can see from the back. So they're a little bit heavier, but they also are significantly quieter. And inside they also do have a type of baffling system which further reduces the sound. You do get a bit of power loss in these, which you do notice, but for the gains in running quietness, this is one of my preferred exhausts when I want to bash around. Another example of a lightweight one, Thunder Tiger Femke 514. I'm sure they had ideas of racing with these that make a huge racket. That tinny loud sound resonates with the nitro engine so much. On the plus side, what you do get when you have the silicone coupler here, the silicone coupler itself can absorb quite a lot of noise and vibration, and in practice takes a lot of bashes out of the exhaust system as well if you do have an accident or hit something, giving that huge flexibility there. An example of a big silicone coupler is here on the from Hobauer cars, the Hyper. You can see that was a Hyper exhaust, Hyper 7, 8s, 9s. For some reason they opted to use a curved silicone coupler and then this part of the manifold. One of the reasons might have been to have this portion of silicone in the pipe to absorb a fair amount of sound, because as it goes through that different dense softer material does absorb quite a lot of pulsation. The exhaust itself is also slightly thicker, so these I would say provide a reasonable sound. I had a lot of fun with Hyper 7s and I have to say that their sound is reasonable for bashing about, especially when you're in a built up area. I mean, the moaners are always going to moan and complain, but at least there's something we can do about it. Another example of a thin loud one, XTM Racing. Not as thin as that Thunder Tiger one, but these make a racket. Silicone coupler absorb some of the racket. And then let's look at some 1/10 scale ones. So another plastic HPI one. I quite like these, quite quiet for running these 1/10 scale cars. Good chamber size, no real penalty for running these. And then the dustbin type, often found on 10th scale cars. These can be really quiet because they use a very thick amount of aluminium, and if you look in there you can just see that whole car is cast aluminium as well, which is particularly good at sound deadening. It's not made from a roll sheet or something that's been pressed hard. It's a less dense form of aluminium, which is good for absorbing vibrations and sound. Now another really effective way, which is employed particularly on these older Tamiya TGSs, was they put a long silicone pipe that went over the end of here and to the back bumper of the car and down to the ground, so directing the sound pulses into the ground under the car also absorbed another amount of the noise from the engine. But the long silicone pipe is probably the most effective way of quietening these down. Now it can look a bit silly, but at one point I wanted to just play in my garden. There was neighbours everywhere, and I had a long pipe like this that went from the side of the buggy all the way back through the wing, and that made a huge difference to people complaining about it. There was times they wouldn't even realise you were playing with it, or by the time they've realised, you know, you've done your tanks and you're finished, you can go in. So don't shy away from just buying a bit of silicone pipe to really quieten that down, especially for testing when you're working on your tune, or if you're playing in your local park and want to keep the moaners away. Silicone tube, the best example of a sound deadening material for nitro exhaust engines. A variation on that is what's called a stinger pipe, which is just a short bit of silicone tube directed down, usually to the ground. This is a quick, probably the quickest, easiest, cheapest way. Don't have to change exhaust or anything, just buy a bit of this stuff, put it on the end of your exhaust, direct it down. Very effective in dampening that sound from that engine and keeping moaners at bay. I'd say it's always worth having a bit of this in your toolbox or spares box with you. Not only is it actually effective, but if you do get someone moaning and you don't want to go home, you can show that you're doing something about it, which isn't much effort for yourself. Just say, oh look, I'll do something about this, put this on, and it's a noticeably quieter exhaust sound after that, so it would keep them a bit happy. So that's some examples of what's available. You can go try and get a plastic type muffler. Stay away from the race type ones that are all alloy. Use a stinger pipe, or if you're going to use one, use a bit of silicone coupler, or one of my favourite metal ones, the Kyosho one. Next, let's have a quick look in these ones. These three are clearly designed to be quieter, so let's see what they've done from the factory about it. First, let's open the Kyosho. These two screws here. And what you see in here is this additional cone. Now this sort of creates a dual chamber effect in there, which you can see. It's removable, so you can choose whether you want it or not, or have it or not. So, and then you can also see here the thicker material. It's actually a casting as well. Remember I was saying about the different grain structure in cast aluminium as opposed to rolled or pressed. You can see the casting mark there. It was made in a mould. So that's why these are so effective. It's the thicker cast aluminium dual chamber design. Great exhaust, these. Easily available from eBay. Just look out for it. Distinctive 2 flanges from the Kyosho models. You can add the stinger pipe to it as well. Right, let's have a look at the HPI one. What have they done on the inside? There's a better screwdriver. And look, they've also put a dual chamber, a bit more elaborate design there. Clearly generating heat from its resistance. You can see that heat profile going through it. But again, definitely minded to keep things quieter. This is the standard exhaust from the HPI Savage. Removable too. Maybe you want more sound. Pop this bit out. Cheap mod there, isn't it? Right. Then let's lastly look at what Antsman have done. Quite like this Antsman muffler. Again, in practice, is one of the quieter ones. This is most relevant for most of us who can't always make the journey to a track or a specific place. You've got your local areas that you can get to. Or when you just want to do small changes and checking before you do go for a big day out. Right, now you can see a really thick plastic here. Really quite thick, but no extra baffle. Good these. Again, from the Antsman 1/8 scale nitro cars. So in summary, I'm going to give some of my thoughts on the noise nitros make. The noise is part of it. That's what we love. I want people to enjoy nitro. One of the big issues is the noise, and there's ways around it, which is what I'm showing you. Now, the best option probably is to get yourself to a place where you're going to be left alone and you're not going to annoy people with the noise. And I've been doing this for decades, so I've been that guy at both ends of the scale. I also wouldn't appreciate, after a hard week's work, my one day off in my garden, just having somebody incessantly revving a nitro engine in the garden next door or up and down the street. In the same vein, I want to go and do that to relax as well. So the best way is to get yourself somewhere where it's not going to annoy somebody. And some good examples, accessible examples, are I'll go to near a busy road or near a railway line, if the field is near a railway line, or the car park is near a motorway or a lay-by, where there's something else making an even louder sound that no one can really argue with the fact you're making a noise there. And they wouldn't want to hang around there either. It's not disturbing their peace to be near a railway or a motorway or another busy junction. Now, don't go on the junction, don't drive your car on the road or the railway, but close to it. You get the idea. Where there's something where somebody else wouldn't want to be anyway, you're in better standing and you're going to be left alone. Being left alone has massive advantages. You're going to get through more tanks of fuel. You're not going to be under pressure to get out of there or have somebody annoying you looking over your shoulder. You can actually relax a bit and concentrate on tuning your car and getting it working just right, and then onto your driving. Now, I know that's not always practical. If you're younger, you don't have your own transport, or these days you might just not have your own transport, and you want to go to what areas that are accessible to you. And then I also appreciate that you do get nosy parkers and dog walkers who think it's their moral prerogative in life to come and stick their beak in and tell you how they think you should operate in the world. Now, I don't particularly stand for that either, and I'll give you some examples of what you can do about that. Firstly, never escalate the situation. None of this stuff is worth getting into an altercation with anybody over, or putting yourself in a compromising position, or even losing your own cool. It only makes you look worse and you'll regret it after. You'll regret that you lost control there. So make sure that doesn't happen. But that doesn't mean you can't stand your ground. And I'll give you some examples of what you can say in relation to that. So firstly, you can say things like, don't worry, I won't be here for long. And you can make light of the fact that, look, the fuel tank only lasts for 6 minutes. And the car's even less reliable than that, which is often the case, as we know. And make sort of assurances that you won't be in the area for long. And I would say it is good practice to not stay in your area for long if you are going to make noise in a built-up area. Keep it down to a few tanks and then leave. Come back another day. Don't just stay at it all day non-stop. Try and limit your exposure to that zone, or go to a different zone then and spread out your exposure over that day. If the other person wants to persistently demand that you change what you're doing or stop, you could remind them that they're not an authority and they're free to contact an authority who could do something about it, but they need to just go and do that themselves. I mean, to add a little bite to that, you could remind them that if they are impersonating an authority, that is actually a criminal offence in most Western countries. So they might want to consider what they're saying to you. And don't forget, it is a free world. Luckily, still we do live in a free world. You are entitled to enjoy yourself in a manner that doesn't harm other people or isn't too egregious to them. So if you feel you're still being mindful of that, you don't need to concede ground, in my opinion. This is what people like us like doing. If you be reasonable with it, it's not indifferent to people who overly trim their hedges every weekend. And as an anecdotal story, I lived somewhere once where the neighbour behind was an obsessive compulsive with their garden maintenance, and every weekend they would have two professional gardeners in using two-stroke power tools, trimming the hedges to perfection most of the day. Now, the garden did look fantastic, but I realised after this was ruining my weekend every weekend, week out. You couldn't rest or enjoy the fact you had time off or time in the garden, because all you would hear is that sound constantly. But that reminded me why, or gives you an example of what you can say when people try and infringe upon your reasoning for using nitro cars and two-stroke cars, that it's not dissimilar to somebody using petrol-powered garden tools in their garden. And of course they can just use electric ones in the same way that someone could tell you to use an electric one. So to summarise those thoughts, do your best to not impact people. I've given you a load of options here of things you can do to quiet down the exhaust. Embrace the benefits that brings you, not to impact other people. It is better for your hobby. It's going to keep you engaged longer. It's going to enable you to reach higher standards of driving, engine tuning, vehicle performance, and being left alone to do it just helps your heart fill up with that joy that nitro brings. Whereas if you have a bit of an altercation with somebody over it, that can really cloud the experience. So as someone who's been at this for decades, I still want to be this person for decades. I'm not going to stop. But this is what I have learned. In practice, it is better to embrace avoidance of a situation where possible. If you do find yourself unable to do that, or you're out for a short test where you can't go far for various other reasons, again, some of these exhausts, they do bring a lot. have one. You're going to pick these up for next to nothing on eBay. Fit them, have them, reduce that exposure to people. But I must say it would be against my principles just to concede ground. Stand your ground politely. Explain that you will be moving on in short order. And that's enough of a concession to make for another individual. Another person has the same legal standing as you. They don't have any more or less. So they are your equal. A quick note on some of the methods somebody else may take this further, which would be relevant if you persistently do use nitro cars in a built-up area. And most of the West in built-up areas, they do have avenues, legal avenues, with some power to have orders brought upon you if you persist in this kind of behaviour. What they would need to do to pursue that is not just tell you, and which I would always remind somebody that they're free to go and pursue whatever avenues are available to them legally, but just to tell you is not how it works. They have to record your sound. They have to, preferably using a sound meter, and log the amounts of times you use it, how many times across a month, a period of months, and then they have to present that to the local government or local enforcement agency. Essentially, you have to construct a case out of it to meeting a threshold of like antisocial behaviour on your part, which they can then bring against you. Now, that's why people are quick to just tell you you can't do this and you shouldn't do this and stop doing it, because it involves work on their part to actually do something about it. And I would say, even though these laws are in place, the guidelines are still very much in your favour, because these tanks of fuel do only last a few minutes at a time, and in practice you're not able to really do this all the time. It would be infrequent, and they would quickly get bored of trying to record and log the amount of times you do it. And then if they did, and that was presented to an authority, again, it probably wouldn't be out of a reasonable realm of behaviour, which you could counterclaim with somebody who is maintaining the hedge with a noisy hedge cutter, chainsaw, petrol-powered lawnmower, something like that. So that's just a bit of my thinking on the issue of sound. It is an issue. Let's not avoid it. Let's look at it from all these different angles, what we can do practically about it, and carry on riding nitro.